Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the Proposal Generator. In this week's training, I'm going to show you how to create this incredible proposal generator, and it's fully dynamic, fully customizable, and you're going to be able to create proposals in just a few clicks. I'm going to show you how to create this incredible application right in Excel. I cannot wait, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining us this week. I really appreciate it. I've got a fantastic tool for you, the Proposal Generator, like nothing I've ever done before. You won't want to miss a minute of this training. I'm going to show you how to create this incredible, fully dynamic, fully customizable proposal generator. You can create tons of types of proposals, any type you want, and you can be able to do it in just a few minutes. You're also going to be able to recall old proposals, pull them up, and you'll be designed by status. It's going to be an incredible training. You won't want to miss it. I create these trainings quite often for you every other week now. We may go back to every week. We'll see how it goes. But I'm working on an incredible freelance course for any type of freelancer to help you start your freelance career or continue or grow your freelance career. It's going to be an incredible course. I'm working very hard on it. That's why we're doing every other week for a while. And of course, that's going to be for any type of freelancer, not just Excel freelancers. So I hope you'll check that out. It should be available next month. If you do like these trainings, I just ask a few things. Go ahead and click that subscribe button. That is really going to help me out. Also, don't forget to click the like button. That will help generate more views, and I really appreciate that. Get other people interested, and of course, you can share that as well. All right, great. So we're going to get started on this training. I've got so much to show you. I'll give you a rundown of what it's about, how we're going to do that, and then I'm going to go over every single step with you, exactly how I created it. So you're going to be able to not only customize this yourself, you're going to be able to create your own after this training. So make sure you follow every step. Of course, this template is absolutely free. All you need to do is click the link down below in the description, and I'll get that sent over to you via either your email or Facebook Messenger. However, if you do want to support this channel, and a great way to do that is to grab the 250 workbook pack. That's 250 of my best templates, all for a very, very low price. I'm putting that out there, and I'll put the links down below as well. All right, on this training, what we have is a proposal generator. We're going to be able to pull up previous proposals just by entering the proposal number. We have a date, a proposal status with multiple statuses. We've got a proposal name, the name of the proposal. We've got a customer list. We'll be able to add new customers. We'll be able to quickly update, and we've got a total amount. We've also got milestones. We can create milestones. Maybe your particular proposal has multiple payment milestones and you want to generate. You want to have those milestones available in that proposal there. We also have the amount and the percentage automatically generated based on the total amount, right? So if we change this to 300 and this to 100, you see that those percentages automatically update. We've got a list of variables. These are things that you can have in your template. For example, in the About Us, if you want your company name, Fred Fredder's Web Design, that's the name of our company. Fred's doing web design now. So he can have that in there. Of course, you want to view the proposal with your data or without your data. You can just do that. So now it's just based on those variables, right? Now, variables are something like your company, right? So in the actual proposal, it'll be placed by your company, or of course your customer name or anything like that. We've also got customer information that we can put inside the proposal date, and lots of other things that we can have in there. Okay. All right. So what we can do is we also have the ability to have proposal items. Now we can create brand new proposal items. If we want to create a brand new item, we can just set a name for that proposal item. Let's say we want a warranty 2, right? Different type of warranty. We can do that. Clicking OK, and we'll just put this, let's say your proposal is valid for 120 days, right? We can then save that item, and that item now becomes available for us to use in the future, right? So we can now have that available to us. So it's really, we can simply add or update that to that, and it'll be added or updated to that particular proposal. We can click on it. We can also remove it from the proposal. If we want to remove any item, it'll then be removed from the proposal. So it's really, really dynamic. So we can add and update items. And then anytime we click on here, we can then update the items. If we want to add, please see the following payment schedule. If we just want to make this schedule and it's a single, it's just a single schedule there, we can add and update that. That's going to update it there. If we want to save the item, it'll be saved inside the item. So the next time we use it, it's it's going to automatically be updated. So you see now it's been updated there. So it's automatically updated in your proposal. Now this payment schedule, this variable here, right here, this is going to be replaced with the actual payment. And that's of course when we want to see the proposal data. Maybe we only want to see those variables. So we select here, and here inside this, we only see the payment schedule. So when we click any item here, we can then select it from the proposal, and then we can make those updates and we can add it back. So let's say we have an about us, but maybe we want a little bit change to this. Let's just say we want it as an internet website, and let's say we could put and app develop. Maybe we only want to change it for this proposal, right? So an app development company, we could just click add or update to the proposal, and it's going to now add or update that description right here. So now it says website and app development company. So we can update it for either a specific proposal, or we can go ahead and save that item. It's going to be saved inside our database for use next time. So it's extremely dynamic, extremely powerful. And Excel can be just that tool for you to do these amazing things. And I'm going to show you how to do it on this channel. Great. So we have get an idea how we can add those. We can remove items, we can add more items, and they'll be automatically added to the proposal. Saving or updating is going to save the proposal right along with all the information with that proposal. We can create a brand new proposal, or we can pull up an old one simply by entering the proposal number in here. We can print it, we can delete it, we can add a customer. I'll be adding save as a PDF and email proposal on our Patreon program there. So if you want to join a Patreon, I'll be adding these two features along with any other features you want on our Patreon platform. So I'll include the link down below. I'll create these absolutely free for you, but if you want to add a few dollars a month, you can get your feature or your fix, or you want me to focus on a specific area inside our Patreon, I'll be doing that there. Great, so that's kind of a rundown. Now we've got some information, just a little bit of information inside the admin where we have our company information, we have our company address, then we have a kind of a status, right? We can create proposal statuses, and we could set one as default. So if we wanted to, for any reason, we wanted to set our new proposal to archive, right? When we click new proposal, it's going to automatically set that archive right there in E3 to archive. Okay, we're going to go ahead and set that back to draft, right? Our new proposals are going to be set to draft. So that way, when we click new proposal, it's going to automatically be set to draft. Okay, also in our admin, I just have the proposal name. This is just some let's just put dynamic variables, so we can put that. I'll be adding more to that in the future, dynamic variables. Maybe we want to have other variables, so I just left that there for now. Okay, so we can call it different names. Maybe you want to call it estimate, maybe you want to call it bid, maybe you want to call it something different. So it's kind of a dynamic name that we set for those proposals, kind of helpful. Great, so again, as we do this, so we need to save this information, obviously. So where are we going to save it? Well, our main proposal information, right, is our date, our status, name, customer, total amount are going to be saved in our proposal list here. So each unique proposal has an ID, date, status, name, customer, and total amount. That's in our proposal list. Now, also, we need to save these individual items, about item, scope, all the items that are associated with that proposal that make up the entire proposal. We need to save them, and we need to associate them with this proposal number one. So we can do that right here inside the proposal items right here, called proposal items. As you can see, proposal number one has these items. Okay, so it's also, we have an ID that's associated with that, the item name, the description. Now this is a long description, right? If you drop down here, you'll see the long description there, but we're only going to show the single line. That's helpful. So keep in mind, that's the full description there. The proposal row, that's the row that's associated on that. What is that there? That is the row here, row 13, row 14, row 15. So I want to know the row. That way, when we load that proposal back up, it goes back into the correct row that we added it to. Okay, so that's also important. And also we have the database row. That's the row that it's saved on, 4, 5, or 6. Okay, we're going to run an advanced filter, and we're going to have whatever those items are associated with that single proposal ID. We're going to have that here, and that way we can load it directly back into that proposal. Also, our proposal contains some payment schedule items. Notice this proposal number one, has 4 different payment schedule items: a milestone, an amount, and a percentage. Now the percentage is automatically generated. However, we want to make sure that we include the milestone and the amount, and we need to save that in a separate database. So we're going to call that the pay schedule database. And we have the original proposal ID, we've got the milestone, we've got the amount, and I also want to know what row is associated with that. That's on the proposal. here? Is it row 10, 11, or 12? That way, when we load back in that proposal, those items, those proposal items end up in exactly the same row. Also, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the database row that's associated with that. That means when we make updates, we need to make sure that we have those. Now we have those database rows. They're going to be brought into there, and I'm going to display those here. There's just going to change the font color to white, and you're going to see that those database rows are there. They're just temporarily hidden. That's going to be on our database. Lastly, we have our customer, or second to last, we have our customers, just simply a customer list. Our customers have an ID, a name, a company name, customer name, address 1, 2, and phone and email. And lastly, we have our item list. These are our item lists inside our items. This is the drop-down list you saw. This is the item that we just added, warranty 2. That is the item that we added. So if we have multiple different warranty items, we can simply add whichever one we want for that proposal. And we have all the information. Now, we can add and update these items from here. So for example, this warranty 2 item, if I go into the proposal and I decide I want to make a quick update, I just click warranty 2. And maybe I want to change that to, let's say, 160 days. I can do that. And all I need to do then is simply save that item. It is now saved inside. So now when we decide we're going to call it up again, that warranty is going to be 160 days. Inside our items, we see it's now been changed to 160 days. So that gets saved to future use if we want to, right? We may only want it for a single proposal, and therefore we wouldn't save it. We would just add it to this proposal. We can remove any item we want simply by clicking here, and it's going to remove that individual item. Very good. So we have an understanding of it, pretty much the basic format. It's there's not a lot of sheets of this workbook, but what I want to do is that we're going to get into a lot of detail to show exactly how we can create this beautiful proposal. We use shapes on these. As you see, we use shapes. We're not using cells because we don't know when we're going to be up. And also, we're going to keep in mind to show you how we line these columns up. Notice the different font style. That's a little secret there. And we have a signature row here. Okay, great. So there's a lot of things we can do that. Let's go ahead and focus a little bit on just basically the idea of this particular page, and we'll show you what we have here. Okay, the first thing what we want to do is I want to know if we've created a new warranty. In fact, if we've created a brand new name, a new item, I want to save that item somewhere. You see, we've got an item name here. I want to save that somewhere. If I create one and I need to save that somewhere, let's say B1. So when I enter the new name, it's going to be saved directly inside B1. So that's what we're going to call it. The one we just created, warranty 2, that's going to be there. I also want to know the row that's associated with a customer. Now, when we select a customer here, I want to know what row. How do we determine what row? We're going to use some named ranges to help us with that. So let's take a look at some of the ones, especially the ones for customer. And we have something called customer ID. If we tab over it, we see that we have a named range using the offset form. If you've seen my videos before, we use these in almost every single video because they're a great way to have named ranges. And I like the descriptive nature of them as opposed to using tables, which is somehow we don't always know. And then we have one for customer name. So we've got 2 different named ranges for our customer. Now, if I wanted to determine the customer row, I want to know what row is associated with that. And I know that I've selected a customer here in a company name. How am I going to know that, right? How am I going to know where Smith Laundry is? Well, the best way to do that is just to use a match formula. So what we're going to do is we have customer company here, customer company here. That is the particular named range for the customer company, right? If we were to take a look at that and we see we've got customer company, we want to know, we understand that that's the customer company. Let's go ahead and go to that last one again. And just to show you which one we're looking at, the company name, which is a bit different, customer company, let's change that right here. So we have customer company here. That's the company name. I should probably put an underscore because we like consistency on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an underscore here so we have all 3 lined up properly. Okay, so now we have customer company, customer ID, and customer name. So inside this, we want to make sure that we have the customer company here, and we want to match it with E5. E5 is the one we're going to be looking up, right? We want an exact match. I also want to know the row that's associated with that. Now, our first customer starts in row 3, and therefore we're going to add 2. And that's how we know to make sure that we get the proper company customer. Let's add that P on there. And then we've got that. Okay, great. So we have that named range, and that's going to tell us that we know that Smith Laundry is on row 9, right? If we take a look inside our customers and we take a look at Smith Laundry, we see that it is on row 9. Now we're using the index match. Remember, we're matching it. This is going to find out that it's the seventh item, which is correct, but I'm adding 2. It's going to get us the 9, which is going to be the row that's associated. If there's any error, it's going to show empty. Next up, I want to know the proposal ID. Now that proposal ID is located here in column, but I need to know when I load that up, I want to know which one's going to be loaded up inside that proposal. That proposal ID is going to be located right here in B3. I also want to know the row that is associated with that, right? As we see that 1 is on row 4, 2 is on row 5, and 3 is on row 6. So how do we know which row is associated with property ID 1? Again, we're going to use match, and this time we're going to be matching it based on B3. I've got a named range called property ID. If we look in the name manager here, and we see that we have property ID down here, and we've got basically an offset formula, a dynamic named range based on that property ID here, just like we have with the customer ID. So just like that, and if we notice also that our property IDs start on row 4. So if I want to return property ID 1, we're going to add 3 because it's going to return number 1 unless I add 3 because I want the row that's associated with that. So that's just what we've done, matching that ID in B3. We're matching it based on the named range of property ID. We're adding 3 to get the correct row, and if there's an error, we're entering 0. Great. When I place a search for a particular property ID, I need to know if it returns, like if I search for 1, I need to know what row is associated with this. If it's blank, they've entered the incorrect one, right? If they enter 6 and there's no 6, it's going to say please enter a correct proposal ID because there is no 6. So the best way to do that is to know what row is associated with that. So that's what B5 is going to tell us. It's going to do that same match format, but this time it's going to be based on F1. And I know that if this B5 is equal to a value, it is there's a correct row associated with this. However, if it's blank, I know that no proposal ID was found, and therefore the user has entered an incorrect proposal ID inside F1. Okay, so when we do a lookup, we're going to look at B5. If B5 contains a whole number, then I know we have a correct ID. I'm going to take that ID and I'll place it inside B3 using VBA. Great. So I also want to know the next proposal ID. I'm sure I called it property a few times. The next proposal ID. Right? To do that, we're going to use the max formula. If you followed my videos, we use it quite often, and that's going to get us the next unique one. As you see here, we've got 3 different ones, so I want to get 4. If I know the maximum of the property ID is 3 plus 1 is going to be 4. So we've used that formula right in here, and that's going to line us up for the next. Now also I want the property load. I want this in a property. And why is that important? Because when I make changes to, let's say, items here, I want something to happen, right? When I make a change, I want it to add to this, right? I want to save it. However, another type of change is when I'm loading, right? If I do new, that's a type of change. We've changed these. Or if I load in a proposal, this is another type of change, right? But I want to differentiate between the changes that were VBAs loading these items or clearing these items and the user actually adding an ID. This is another type of change, right? So how do we differentiate between those two types of changes? We can use this cell, B7, true or false. So when we know it's loading, it's going to go to true and then back to false. Great. I also want to know the database row that's associated with a particular item. Now that particular item is located on here, B17. So here's the selected item. If I select an item here, I want to know what database row is associated with that. So all I need to do is just run a match, an index. I'm going to match, actually there's probably an easier way to do that now that we can do it. So I'm going to probably index this, right? Here's our database rows for our item, right? So I want to know what database rows associated with this. This particular formula will get us that. So first of all, we want to make sure that B9 contains a value. What is in B9? Every time we select a different item, B9 is going to change. So B9 is going to tell us what item has been selected. Scope of work is located in row 14, row 14. So what I want to do is I want to look up the database name of that item name. What is that database name? We go into the formulas, we go into name manager, we look in item name, we tab over there, we see that we've got all the item names. Well, I want to know what row is associated with this. How do I know what row? Well, we can run an index. I want to make sure that we actually have a correct database number, but I want the row that's associated. About us is row 3, scope of work is 4, and so on and so forth. So I want to know what row is associated with that name. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to look up scope of work, and we know that the database row is based on row 4. And how do we know that? Well, we're going to run an index. First I'm indexing all of the particular items between H1 and H9. Now we're starting at H1, and that's simply because we already have the row that's associated in B9, right? So if I'm indexing H1 and B9 returns 14, and we're using on that single column, we know it's going to return scope of work, right? So this right here is going to return scope of work. That's the item, right? So I'm matching that. Where am I matching that? I'm matching that with the item names, and I want an exact match, and I'm adding 2. That's going to get us the row. So this will get us the database row to ensure that the user has entered a correct item, right? If we know if this is blank, this database row is blank, we know that the user has entered an incorrect name or there is none at all. So that's what we're going to do. I just want to know the item database row, the row that's associated on the selected item. Payment schedule is located on row 5. If we take a look here, payment schedule is located on row 5. Terms and conditions are row 6. So if we go to terms and conditions, we see it's row 6. Again, this is simply the selected item row. We're going to use conditional formatting to automatically update that to take a look. So if we look inside and we go into conditional formatting and we click manage rules, we see a single rule. It's going to be based on B9 equals row. We've given it the dark background and a white bold font. Okay, so that's pretty much all we have to do. I also want to know if we've changed an item. What does this mean there? Well, what this means is if we're making that change, are we making a change to the item here or not? Again, when we make a change to this item, I want to differentiate between the type of change that the user is making, as well as if I want to put possible, well, this is a type of change here, right? I want to differentiate between this type of change and the type of change where the user makes a selection here, right? So that way, if the user decides to save this type of change, maybe they want it, maybe they don't want to do anything with that, or maybe they simply want to add it to the update, right? So they can change that and add it directly to the estimate, or maybe they want to save it as an item, save it for future use, right, in other types of proposals. So they have that. So I want to differentiate between that type of change. So we're going to use B10 to do that. And another one, view data. View data is simply going to be attached to this particular checkbox, right? So if I right click this checkbox and I go into the format control, we see that's linked to B11. So we know that if the user wants to view that proposal detail, they can. If they unselect this, it's going to show just the variables, and you're going to see this B11 is going to go to false. So we need to differentiate between those two to do that. Okay, as you notice that this particular checkbox only allows for a black font, really can't change the font color. So I've cleared out all the font and I've added a different text box here. So I've just put, this is simply a text box here, just simple text box, and I've put a checkbox over it. And that way they can line up properly to do just that. And when I click here, I've also assigned a macro, which we're going to go over. Great. So we understand that the view data is going to be true or false based on this checkbox. I also have a shape here called sample items. Now, when I create these particular shapes, I have to start out with something, right? Every time I create a brand new proposal, all these shapes get deleted and recreated. Well, what I want to do is start it from a sample shape. So there's a sample shape right here. There's no borders right here. It's just black font, and there's of course no spacing around it, and there's no background on it. So we're going to call this sample shape. It's going to come in handy when we go into the VBA. Great. I also want to know the database row that is associated with these items. When I add items here, I want to know what row they're associated on, right? When we save those items here, I need to know that About Us is on row 4. I need to know that Scope of Work is on row 5. I need to save that row somewhere so that I know when I make changes where to save those changes, right? If I make a change to the About Us, I need to know it's changed on row 4, or Scope of Work is on row 5, right? So we need to make sure that when we click Add or Update, those changes automatically get held up. Okay, so if I decide to do possible, you see I changed that to possible. I want to make sure that inside the property items, it also goes to possible, right? So if we click on About here, we see that it's been changed, and we see that here it says possible now because we've made that update. And the only reason we know what row it is because that row is automatically saved directly inside column B here, so we know what row to update that. Great, so that's it for the hidden admin. Of course, you're going to hide these columns when you create these, okay? And also we have, of course, I went over this, the database rows that these payments are associated with. Great, so we understand the principles on this particular screen. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get into the VBA and show you exactly how we are able to create all of this stuff using these amazing macros. All right, excellent. There's a few more hidden things I'd like to show you, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some information here. I'm going to put a font here, a color. I want to show you what we've got hidden up here. So as we know, we've got variables. I want to know that my company name. And so basically, when I put my company name inside here, let's say I have scope of work here, and I want to put my company name for whatever reason. So I'm going to use Alt-Enter to go to the next row, and I'm just going to add in a variable. We're going to call that your company name, your company. Okay, so that would be my company. And then maybe we want to put the customer company, right? So we'll put another variable, customer company. Okay, so once we add that, of course, we want to save that to that, right? So we're going to click add and update, right? And that's going to do, and so now we see inside, because we have viewing the variables, if we were to uncheck this, we would just show the variables. But now what we have is we have the Fredder's Web Design, which is my company, and then our customer company called Smith Laundry right in here. So it's been replaced. So what I need to do is I need to extract those values from somewhere, and that's where these fields are going to help us. So we've created a name range called company name, right? So that's going to come directly from the admin. If we see this is called a company name, here's the field called company name. It's based on, I've got another one called company info. So we use these to create our proposal. So if we look inside our proposal, and we see here, we've got here this text box here. This is just simply a text box here that we can place anywhere. It's called company name. So that means if we change our company name, it's automatically going to be changed. Okay, and that's very helpful. We also have another text box called company info. All we need to do is just then format it accordingly, however we like. I've got, so here also I have company name, right? So as we go through these variables in VBA, all we need to do is look for this and replace it with this. If we were to expand this a little bit, we'd see that we have the full information here. So we also have the customer name. Now, where's the customer name located? Well, that's going to be located right here inside there. So all we need to do is link this cell to whatever's in E5. Also, what I want to do is I want to know the customer contact name. Now, that customer contact name is located directly inside here. C and whatever row associated with the customer. So we know it's in column C of the customers. So if I want to look up that customer name, all I need to do is index the customer names because I've got a named range on that, which is column C. Then I want to know what rows associated. Now we remember we have that customer row located in B2, but this is the actual row, right? So this time we're going to subtract it because we're indexing the customer names, and the customer names start off on row 3. So we're going to subtract 2. That's going to get us, and of course we want a single column. If there's an error, we're going to return nothing. Okay, so that we're going to use. Now what if I want the address 1? Now the address 1 is located on column D. The address 2 is going to be located in column E, F, and G, and so on and so forth. So all we need, if we don't have named ranges for these, all we need to do is index the associated columns. So if we take a look inside here, our customer address here, we're indexing column D1 starting, right? In this case, we don't need to subtract because we're starting at row 1 and we have the row. You see, this is the row number. B2 is the row number. We're starting off column D. So that's going to return the address 1. E is going to return here, column E. The only difference is column E. This is going to return the address 2. The phone number is in column F. And the email is in column G. Okay, I also want the total amount. Maybe we're going to use that total amount inside our proposal. So we want to put that inside there. So we're going to have a variable. Now that's directly going to come from E6. I also want to know the proposal date, and that's it. This one we don't need. There's nothing here. So the proposal date is located in E2. So that's all we need to do. Now we don't necessarily need to see these. So all I need to do in this case, a few ways to do that, but I'm simply going to change the font color to the same as the background. Then I'm just going to shrink this column down since we're not using this column. And that's all we have to do, right? And that's exactly it. So what we need to do is when we run through these variables, I'm going to look inside this text, right? When I want to add that, I'm going to say, is my company found? Is customer? If it is, replace it with what's in here, or replace it with, remember, we have the values in here. I should probably keep these white so you guys don't get confused. So you remember that there are values here just to make sure So we don't forget there's values here. So I look for this inside the text, and if it's found, I replace it with whatever's here. So we can just run a loop replacing all that information, right? Okay, great. So we understand that. And now when we take a look inside our proposal, we have our proposal. I've got a text box here. And then I've got another one here, so another text box, but this particular text box is linked to B3. B3, of course, is our proposal ID here. All right, next up we have the proposal date. Now the proposal date is linked to E2, which is where our proposal date's located. And we also have a text box here. This one is linked to E4. This is the name of our proposal, right? The name of the project here, Smith Web Design, and that's going to be located directly inside E4. So all we need to do is link these text boxes. Presented to Nancy Smith, that's going to be located in F21. That's our customer name. We know that our customer name is located right here in F21. So we can simply link these. I want the customer address, F22, the F23, and then we have also a group shape, right? Both the phone number, which is F24, and the email is going to be located in F25. If I can unselect that. F25. Okay, let's unselect that. There we go. Okay, F25. So it's simply linked to all of the details located right here in this column up to the customer email. So that's how we get it. So every time we change the customer name, it's simple. So if we decide we're going to change the customer, it's automatically going to update. Notice everything updated here automatically, okay? Although Smith, we'll keep it as Smith because our project name, we don't want to get confused here. Okay, great. So we understand how we create this header. Everything else is just text, and this is a little logo I've designed. That's it, okay? So now we're ready to go into VBA. All right, we're going to use the Developers tab, or we can use Alt F11 to get there. Alt F11 is a shortcut. And we have a few macros, right? I've got a few modules. I've got some print macros, which we're not going to be used. I've got everything here inside our proposal macros and our print. This we can probably remove. We don't need that. So we don't need that one. Okay, good. So I really kept it simple. We've also got a form, add new customer form, right? That's simply just a form with a few fields. We'll be going over that. So we've got two modules, one for the proposal items and one for the proposal macros. And I've got some, of course, a few macros located on a proposal sheet. So we've got some change events and some selection change events. Okay, so the first one we want to do is we want to understand how when we make a change to here, what happens when we add an item here? Well, there's a few things that I want to happen. So let's go over that first. That's going to be on change event, meaning when I make a change to column H, what do I want to happen? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to make sure that it gets added to the database. If it's already been added, it'll have a row here. If it hasn't been added, it'll be empty. So we need to determine that because I want to add whatever item it is, I want to add it to the database. Okay, so let's follow that macro and we're going to go in. That's going to be the worksheet change event. For this macro, I've already dimensioned some variables. Item row is long, the item description is a string, item number is long, the variable row is long, the last variable row, property item, the top position, left position, double. I move these over a little bit, so we may not need all of them here in this. So if the user makes a change to any cell larger than one cell, of course, if it's just a single cell, fine. If it's greater than a single cell, then we're going to exit the sub out. This helps prevent issues. On change of proposal items, but not in proposal load, remember I said we're going to have to differentiate between when a user makes a change to here or when we're actually loading all the items here when we load it, all right? Those are also changed, so I need to differentiate. And I said that we're going to use B7 as our differentiator, right? So B7, we want to make sure when a user makes a change, B7 is going to be false. So that's what we're going to do. When the user makes a change anywhere from H13 to H99 and B7 equals false, meaning that it's not loading, right? And I want to make sure there's actual value here, right? The H and the target row must not be empty. If all of those three things are true, then we want to do something. First, I want to make sure that the proposal's been saved. I don't want to allow the user to add items on a proposal that has not been saved, right? So if they click new proposal, and there's a few things, right? They're not going to be allowed to do this. First, they must save the proposal before adding any items. That's essential. And the way we know that is because we know that there's no row that's been associated with this property. Why is that? Because the property ID has not been added yet. So this is going to return an error. We know that there's no property. Why is it returning an error? It's returning an error because it's looking for number 4. It's not found. It's going to return an error. Therefore, we know it has not yet been saved. Okay. So we know that if B4 equals empty, right, we're going to clear the contents and tell the user to please save the proposal before adding any item. I also want to make sure that they've added a customer. Now, if we remember correct, we know that the customer row is on 2. If this is empty, they have not entered a customer. Right? Once they've entered a customer, a correct customer, that B2 won't be empty. So it's important that they actually enter that customer. So if B2 is empty, we're going to let them know that they please enter a customer before entering proposal details. Okay, I also want to set the row, whatever row they've changed, to B9. Remember, whenever they make a change here, we want to make sure, let's go ahead and add in Richmond. Well, create this Richmond, let's see, website. And then we're going to add a mount to this. We won't add any milestones, and we'll just save this. So we want to know, once we've made a change, I want to make sure whatever row we've been working on gets saved into B9. So that target row is going to go right into B9. It's going to trigger the conditional formatting, okay? So B9 is going to take on that target row. Set changed row. Okay, now what we want to do is I want to know what row has been associated with this item. I want to make sure that we know, right? That's very important, the item row, and I want to find it because I want to pull this from the database. So what database row? Of course, we know it's 4 here. It's located in B8, but I also want to know there's another way we can use, and we can use the find, right? The find command. So based on the item sheet, we're going to look in the item name. Okay, and we're going to use the find command. And what we're going to do is, what are we looking for? H in the target row. Of course, that's the target value, or the name that you just changed. We're going to look at XL values, XL row, and whole. I want to return the row. What row is associated with this? I'm going to put that into the item row. Now, if it's not found, it could create an error. Therefore, we wrapped it in on error resume next, and on error go to 0. Then I'm just going to run a little test to make sure it's not 0. If it's 0, then exit the sub. The item's not found. Almost always it will be found, right? And so in that case, what do I want to do? I want to take that description of wherever it's found. What is the description? Well, that description is going to come directly from column B and the item. Here's the description. I want to take whatever's in B and the row that's been found, and I'm going to place it directly inside J3. So we're going to do that with the next line of code, J3, and now we're just going to set that description. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add or update that item, right? When I add an item, not only do I add it here, but it gets added to the scope as you've just seen it. So we're going to run a macro. I'm going to go over that macro right now called item add or update. Now it's based on the property items. And if we go up to the top here, item, add or update item. Okay, I'll go through these variables as we go through them, the macros. So item, add or update item. So what that macro is basically going to do is we're simply going to put it directly on the proposal. Now keep in mind that it's got to go, we have to keep track. So if we decide to add another item, I want to make sure that that second item, let's change that up, scope of work. Well, let's change this to the about us. Just probably start with about us, right? I want to make sure that when we make a change, I want to know that they must go in order, right? The about us. And so as we add items, they go in the proper order. And so to do that, I want to make sure that we keep them separately. So if we take a look at this shape here, this is just simply a shape that we've created, right? It's automatically placed. And that shape has been given a name called item 1. This shape has been called item 2. That's going to help us keep track. We know that because they're in order, okay? So we're going to take a look at that. So I need to know, we're going to set that pay schedule as a string. That's going to help us out. With the proposal, we're going to focus on that. Now we're going to set that selected row based on B9. Remember, B9 took on that target row. We know that B9 is the row that we're focusing on right now, right here, okay? So that's 14. So then all I want to do is I want to pull whatever item description into a string variable, and that's going to come directly from J3. Now J3 is this big merge cell here, all the information from J3, so that's going to go into a string variable right here. Item number, I want to know the item number, right? If you take a look at inside here, we saw that this is called item 1 and this is called item 2, right? How do we know that item number? If I know this is row 13 and I subtract 12, I know it's item 1. If I subtract 12 from 14, I know it's item 2. So the row number 14, if we subtract 2, it's going to tell us exactly what item number. I want to keep track of it. The item number is important because that's going to let us know what shape number, what shape. This is shape 1, shape 2, item shape 1, item shape 2. So we're going to use that. So the item number is simply the selected row minus 12. It's going to set that item number. Now what I want to do is I want to first thing I want to do is add or update that database, right? If I add an item here, I want to make sure that on proposal 4, I want to make sure that it gets added inside a property items database here. So let's change this up. We don't need that. And then this, if you see this, I'll show you what that looks like in VBA, but basically I'm going to turn wrap text to false, and that's going to make it. So I want to make sure that it gets added to a database. Notice that the 2 items we created are going to be on item rows 22 and 23. So I want to make sure that they get added to the database. Now, how do I know that they've been added? Because there's a value here, right? 22 and 23. If I add a new one, it's going to be assigned to 24, right? So I want to make sure, I want to look in B. If B is empty, then we know it has not been added to the database yet. B is going to tell us, B in the row there is going to tell us whether it's been added or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look directly to B, range B, and the selected row. If it's empty, we know it's a new proposal item. Otherwise, it's an existing, right? So if it's new, what do we need to do? We need to find the first available row. So we're going to look in here. We're going to find that first available row, and we're going to add the item into it. I want to add the proposal ID, the item name, the description, and all the things we mentioned before. So that's just what we're going to do inside the code right here. So as we bring in our code, so the first thing is I'm going to determine the first available row based on our proposal items sheet, A99 and XLF. This is the first available row, So once we know that first available row, we put it into a variable called long variable called prop item row. Then what I want to do is only for new items. So these are all for the new items. This is only for the existing items. So for the new items, what else do I want to do? I want to take whatever's in B3, that's the ID, and I want to put that directly inside column A. Notice that there's the proposal ID is located right here. So I want to put that right in here. That's going to be in column A. So column A is going to take on that proposal ID. Next up in column D, and I want to put in the row. What is the row that's associated with this? What row is that? Well, that would be row 15, row 14, or row 13, because when I load it back up, I must know what row. So this could be, so I want to put that 15, and I want to put it directly inside column D, and then I want to put the database that's associated in column E. I also want to take that database row. I also want to put it directly in column B here. So those are the few things that we're going to be doing for new items. Column D is going to take on that selected row. Let's go back in there so we can, D is going to take on that proposal row. Proposal row is going to be taken on right there. So that's our selected row that we've already captured from B9. Next up in column B, I want to put that proposal item row. What is the row that's associated? That database row must go in there. And then in E here, I want to put in a formula called equals row. And that way, if we delete a row, it's always going to be accurate. I want to know that database row. So we're going to put in that formula in column E like this. E and the proposal item row equals row. Okay, that's that row formula. So all of these things are for new. If it's an existing, if we've already added it previously, all we need to do is extract the database row directly from column B and whatever row. So all we're doing is simply extracting. And that means if I decide I'm making a change to here, let's say I want to change this to terms and conditions, right? All we need to update is row 23 now contains terms and conditions. So when we go into the property items and we go into 23, we see it now says terms and conditions. Okay, so that's really important because we know that there's a row. So that's all we need to do. So continuing on, we're extracting that row. Everything else, these 3 items, we're simply doing whether they are new or whether they are existing proposal items. So B is going to take on that item name, right? B is going to take on that item name. C is going to take on that description. Of course, the item name is coming directly from column H. The description is coming from J. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So B is going to take on that item name, which is in column H. And C is going to take on that item description, which we've already pulled out from J3 into a variable. Okay, another thing I want to do is I want to set that whole row into the proposal item row. I should use bigger variables so I remember. Proposal item row. That entire row, I'm going to wrap text equals false. Now, if it's not, right, it's going to be too big. If I go into the proposal items here and I decide I'm not going to wrap text, it's going to be just too big and it's going to be hard, right? We don't want it to look like that. So within VBA, making wrap text equals false is going to allow us to do that so we can see things in a nice manner. We don't need to see all the details here. It's not necessary inside the database. We only need to see full details here inside the proposal screen. So by adding this wrap text equals false, it's going to ensure that the rows have all the same height. So now that we've added this information to the database, the next thing we want to do is update it directly on here, right? I need to know what item number it is here. So how are we going to do that? Well, the best way to do that is simply to determine what number it is and where to place it, right? We know if it's number 1, I'm going to place it probably right around row 11 or row 12. I can't remember which one I placed it. Row 12, right? The first one's going to be on row 12, but if it's anything after that, for example, if it's after that, if it's not the first item, let's say it's the second, I need to look to the item before and determine where it ended and then place it below that. So I need to set that top position, right? What is the top position? If the item number is less than or equal to 1, I don't know why it would be less than, so it'd probably be equal to 1. It should never be less than. If it's equal to 1, then the top position is based on L12 top position. So basically row 12, what is the top position of row 12? That's all we're doing. The column wouldn't matter in this case. So that means the first one's always going to appear here, right in row 12. However, if it's subsequent items, and if the item number's 2 or greater than that, then we need to account for it. Else, the top position, meaning it's not the first shape, is going to be based on the shapes, the item, and the item number minus 1. What does that mean? If I'm placing 2, right? Now we're on number 2, we're on this one here. And we just updated this. We know it's item number 2. So where are we going to place that? Well, I'm going to look to item number 1. Item number 1. I'm going to look at where's the top position of this shape. And I also need to know the height of this shape. If I take the top position and I add on the height and I add a little bit more, then we have our top position of our second shape. So that's just what we're going to do. We know the item number minus 1. So that means, let's say we're on item number 2, we subtract 1, we'll get item 1. So what is the top position of that shape? I also want to know what the height of that shape is. We're adding it. I need to know what the height of that shape is. What is the height of that shape? And I'm also going to add a little bit of a spacer because I don't want them right on top of each other. So that's going to set the top position. Now the left position is always going to be the same. It's going to be basically the left position of column L, but I want to move it out a little bit to the left. I don't want it right on the border. So I'm going to add 3 to that. This is going to set our left position. Once we have our left position set, then what we want to do is I want to clear out the item shape. I'm going to be working with an item shape. We've already defined the item shape as a shape. So we want to make sure we set that. But I want to clear it out just to make sure that we don't have anything there. That variable gets cleared out. I want to test now. I want to run a test to make sure that it exists. So we're going to test it. If it doesn't exist, I need to create it. For example, if I make an update to this scope of work, I know that shape 2 already exists, right? So all I need to do is update it about us, right? So it's going to change, so that shape 2 is going to change to about us. However, what about the fourth one? 1, 2, 3, but the fourth one doesn't exist. If the fourth one, let's say we create another one, that one, this shape, item 4, doesn't exist yet, so I need to create it. So how do we know? We run a test. Does this shape exist or not? So this is what we're going to do. If it doesn't exist, it could create an error, and therefore we're going to wrap it in on error resume next and on error go to 0. We're going to set the item shape equal to the shape's item and the item number. Check for existing shape. If it doesn't exist, that means item shape equals nothing. That means it doesn't exist. Then I need to create it. How are we going to create it? Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our sample shape right here, sample shape. We're going to duplicate that. And we're going to use that. We're going to duplicate it. Then we're going to give it a unique name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fill it with that description. Okay. So to do that, we can do this shapes dot sample shape duplicate and then giving it a unique name, item name, and the item number. Now we've created a shape if it does not exist. Now we can work with that specific shape, okay, so now what we can do is shapes, item name, and the item number. I'm going to work with it. I'm going to set the instance. I want to know, does it include the pay schedule, right? This specific variable called pay schedule. If it does, like it does here, pay schedule, you see, then what should we do? Let's go back to 1 so that it includes the pay schedule. So this one includes the pay schedule. If we see here, it includes that pay schedule. So if we're going to check to see if inside the description, it includes the string pay schedule. If it does not equal 0, that means it includes, let's say, pay schedule variable. And if it does, then what do I want to do? I want to change the font. Why is that important? And that's important because what we want to do is we want to use, and that is a monospace font. And that's really important because we've got columns here. We need to make sure the spacing is correct. So if we were to go ahead and take a look at this again and just update that, you would see that we now have different fonts. You see how they're not lined up anymore? Now that's really important. So that is exactly why we're using a font. And I'll explain further, so don't worry. And that is why we need to use this particular font for this Lucida console, or any font that where we have every character ensures that we have the proper spacing. That means every character has the exact same spacing, right? So that way we can have nice columns in string variables, okay? So within a string, we have the exact same spacing, and we'll go over a little bit more detail on that. Okay, so we want to ensure that the font is this particular Lucida console, or any monospace font would work okay. All right, so we're going to set that. That's only for the pay schedule, right? Now we're going to set that item description, and I want to remove the word pay schedule, right? We want to remove that variable, okay? And that's only if it is pay schedule, contains pay schedule. Next up, what I want to do is I want to set the text frame. That means the text of this particular shape that we just created to the item description right here. Okay, so that's going to update it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to also make sure that we're going to set the proposal. I want to know the width, that entire shape. How big should it be? It should be probably the width of that, but probably a little bit less. I'm going to subtract that. Width minus, let's say 5, right? Because I don't want it quite that big. So we're going to set the width of that, right? I want to make sure that we set the width up there at the top. So we're going to set the width of that to the width of column L minus a little bit, because it's a little bit too big. Next up, what do I want to do? I want to make sure that we're going to also auto fit that text frame, auto size. I want to make sure that the height of that text box will contain all of, notice that there's different heights, right? I want to make sure that the box height changes based on the amount of text inside there. Okay, so that we're going to use that. So that way the height becomes dynamic. We've set the width specifically. However, the height is dynamic based on text frame 2, auto size. We're going to MS auto size the shape to fit the text, right? We're changing the shape, although we've fixed the width. We're going to also set the height of it equals to the height plus 5. I just want to make sure we're adding a little bit extra onto the height, right? Just to make sure that we've come to, I decided to add a little bit more onto whatever that automatic height is. We're going to add 5 to that. Add 5 pixels, add 5 pixels, add 5 pixels to height. So that explains it. Okay, so I want to set the left position based on the left position and set the top position. That's all we're going to have to be doing. Next up, we're going to update the remaining shape's position, right? Once I've added it, right, I want to make sure that we've updated all the other shapes' position to make sure that they're accordingly. Now, to do that, what we're going to do is determine all the other shapes. And why is that important? Right? Let's say I have the about us, but notice that the about us and the scope of work have different shapes. If I don't update, if I change the about us to, let's say, scope of work, right? Notice that all the other shapes had to change positions, right? I couldn't keep it up here before it was up here. So I had to move it down. So what we need to do is update all the other shapes to set their top positions differently, because this may have been less, right? So take a look at this scope of work. If I change it back to the about us, everything gets reset up, right? Notice it's higher. So what we need to do is take all the remaining shapes and then adjust their top positions accordingly. So we can do that with the following lines of code. So we're going to update the remaining. I want to determine the last item, right? So if we're on the last item, there's nothing beyond that. We don't need to worry about that. So determining the last row, in this case, it's 18, right? So it's going to be based on column H. And then what we're going to do is the last item number, right? The last item number is based on the last row minus 12, right? Always. So we know the last item number is 6, right? Warranty 2 is 6. If we take a look here at this shape here, it's called item 6, right? So we know 18 minus 12 is 6. So that's what we know our last shape. So once we have our last shape in there, we're going to determine if the item number is also the same as the last item number, meaning we're already on the last, that we don't need to position everything out. If we've made a change, if I made a change to this last item, let's say I changed to scope of work, right? I don't need to, there's nothing, no other shapes beyond that, so we don't need to worry about changing that position, right? If it's already the last item. So if the item number is already the last item number, go to the last shape. It's just going to skip all of it and go right here. But if it's not, then what we need to do is reposition everything else. So we need to run a loop to do that. For the shape number, it's equal to the item number plus 1, right? If I've just made a change to item number 1, we don't need to change the position of this, but I need to change the position of item 2 all the way down. So it's going to be the item number plus 1, the one below that, all the way to the last one, right? And then all we're going to do is we're going to set the item shape equal to nothing just to make sure that we're clearing that. I want to make sure that the next item exists just to make sure. So we're going to set the item shape equal to item and the shape number, right? So we're going to loop through all the shape numbers, all the subsequent going from, if we make a change to 1, we're changing going to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, to 6, and changing them all over, okay? So just going back there and back and back. So to do that, we want to make sure that we actually have a shape, to make sure that the shape exists, just to double check. So we're going to wrap it in on air, resume next, and on air, go to 0. We're going to set that item shape equal to the shapes and the shape number. Remember, the shape number is a loop from the one above to the last item. So what we're going to do is we're going to set if the shape number equals 1, then go to the next shape, right? So we don't need to set the top position for 1 just in case. It's kind of right. However, if it's not 1, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the item shape is not nothing, meaning we actually have a shape. The two negatives cancel each other out, meaning we have a shape, meaning it is correct. Then we're going to set the item shape to the top item shape equals to the one above, the shape above, shape number minus 1, that's the one above. Remember, we've already discounted in case it's the first shape. We're skipping this step if it's the first shape. So that means if it's the second, third, or fourth, whatever, we're going to determine the top position of the shape above. We're also going to determine the height of the shape above. And that is what we're going to set. Then the item shape top, we could probably do +5, just set a little bit, right? Setting that item shape, just adding it a little bit. Now we're going to set the next item. So that's going to set up everything, okay? Just going to simply loop through that. And it's going to update all the shapes. That's it. And then update, all we're going to do is then determine whether we're showing or hiding data. So this is going to reset all the items. The next thing we're going to do is just going to reset all the items. There's another macro that's going to make sure that we either showing data or not showing data based on this. So this macro is called proposal, show or hide data. It's going to go over all the other data. Great. So this macro basically showed you exactly how we're updating changes, right? Add or update any changes that we make here. So if we make that change, right, this macro showed you exactly how to update it and to show it directly here. And if we decide to add, let's say I'll add some more rows here so we can see exactly why that's so important, setting that sizing, test and test. Right now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that everything updates accordingly. We add additional rows. So when we click add or update, we know that everything else is going to be moved down properly. The next macro I will go over is the one you just saw, where we're actually adding either the variables or we're adding the actual data. And that's the macro that runs when we select this. So when we click assign macro, it's called show or hide data. Now that's the same exact macro that you saw right here called proposal, show or hide data. So we're going to take a look at that right now. And that's going to be inside the macros right here called proposal, show or hide data. That's the one I want to show you. It's in the proposal macros module. So this is really important because what I want to do is I want to loop through all of the items and either show the data or show the variables, right? So the best thing to do that is basically what we're going to do is I want to clear out all the items here and then just going to start over to make sure that everything's been added accordingly. So, and I'll probably be updating this code. I think I can optimize it even more than I already have. So probably in your Patreon, you're going to see an optimized version. So make sure you sign up on our Patreon. Great place. We'll also take your suggestions. So to get the best templates, the best training, Patreon is the way to go for that. I'll include the link down below for Patreon. So we'll see you over there. All right. So first thing what we want to do is with the proposal sheet, remove any and all shapes, right? Only those shapes that contain the text, right? I don't want to move all the shapes from the sheet. I only want to remove those that contain the string item like item 1, item 2, or item 3. So to do that, we're going to loop through all of the shapes inside the sheet. for each item shape. Keep in mind that item shape is already a variable in the top here called item shape as a shape. So we're going to loop through all of those item shapes. So for each item shape in shapes, in string, we're going to check to see if the name of that shape contains the string item. If in string function, the item shape name contains item, meaning it's greater than 0, it's been found, right? Then we're going to delete the shape. So this is simply going to delete all the shapes. Then what I need to do is I need to loop through all of the existing items. So we know it's going to start on row 13, but we don't know where it's going to end. So we're going to put that into a variable called last item row based on column 18. So the last item row is column H, I should say. Column H and XLUP row. That's the last item row. And now we're ready to run our loop, right? We need to loop through every item. For item row equals 13 to the last item row. The property I need to know based on the database, right? I'm going to pull all the information up based on the database, right? So I want to pull the descriptions based on this, right? Oh, I need to update that here. I'm going to probably update that. I think when we run the advanced filter, we also need to do it because the advanced filter also creates that too. So not only when we save it to the database, but also when we run the advanced filter, we want to turn that off. So what I want to do is I want to extract, if I know the database row, I want to extract the description from column C and the database row. We know the database row because it's located here, here, here. So we need to extract that, and we're going to put that into a variable. So what we can do now, the proposal item row equals B in the item row, get the item database row. And then of course we can extract that description as just mentioned in column C and put that into a variable. Now what I want to do is I want to determine, now are we adding the actual data in here? Or are we adding, we can remove that this is kind of nice. So we can remove that if you've created something you don't want to put it in, just clear it out and then just add or update that and it's going to be gone. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to know, are we adding the data in here? In other words, are we putting the website in here just like we had, or see how it says your company, or are we going to put in the variables? If this is unchecked, we know that here inside view data is false, and we know we're going to just look at the variables. Notice it says your company or customer company or pay schedule. Do we want to see the variables or do we want to see the data? If B11 is false, we're just going to see the variables. So we don't need to replace any of these variables with the actual values. So that's going to be if B11 equals false. So if B11 equals true, we're going to show the data. So we're going to do the following, right? We want to add in those variables. So first of all, we need to determine the last variable row. We don't know, maybe we're going to add some more variables. So we're going to take the last based on column D. Our last row is actually 27. So we're going to put that into a variable and we're going to call it the last variable row. Let's put that in here. Last variable row. Okay, so now that we have that last variable row, we're going to ready to run our loop. We know it starts out in row 19. So what we're going to do is we are going to go for the variable row equals 19 to the last variable row. We're going to take that item description. We're going to look for, what am I looking for? I'm looking for this inside the item description. If it is found, we're going to replace it to whatever value is in here as we loop through all the variables. So to do that, we're simply going to use the replace command. We're going to look inside the item description. If whatever's in column E is found, that is the variable there. That's that variable. Let's scroll up a little bit so we can see both. If that variable is found, we're going to replace it with whatever's in column F. So that's how we replace it. However, there's different formats. Notice there's some date formats, there's some amounts. So what I want to do is I want to use whatever format is in the cell. If it's date formatted, I'm going to use this format. If it's number formatted or dollar formatted or currency formatted, I want to use the format, or phone formatted, I want to use the format. So I want to match whatever format is in the cell. So not only do I want to take the value of it, but I want to take the format of the cell. So to do that, we're going to wrap it around format. So we're going to take the value, we're adding the value, and we're going to also take whatever the format is of column F in the row, and we're going to format the value based on this. So this will not only take the value, but the format, and that way everything gets formatted properly. Okay, so all we need to do is loop through that so we can add as many variables as we want, simply just allowing it, of course, if you have a table big enough. So that's it. That's all you need to do. So now we've added all the variables into our description. And now what we're doing is we are ready to add it. And let's refresh that so we can refresh that. Okay, that looks nice. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to add in the payment schedule, right? if the user has selected this, right, I want to make sure that we add in that payment schedule here. Now that payment schedule is located right here. Now I could have added another table, like taken a picture of this table and added that picture, but it became complicated because we would then have to group this shape along with the picture grouped together, and the sizing, how would we know how to size it? So it was a little bit possible, but much more tricky, much more confusing. This was a little bit easier as long as we were able to change the font, and that way we have everything lined up. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the payment table, if any. How do we know if there's any? Well, we're going to check if the last row here is greater than 10. We know that we've added some payment details. So we're going to do just that. And also we know if there's a variable called pay schedule, we're going to replace it with anything else, right? Like for example, in this one, we see that there's a variable called pay schedule. So we know that we need to replace this with whatever the payment schedule is. So we're going to check that item description. If the payment schedule does not equal 0, meaning in string, we found the string payment schedule inside the item description, and it does not equal 0, that means that variable exists inside. So we do have the pay schedule variable, and we need to replace that with the actual payment schedule. So to determine that, we need to determine the last schedule row. That last schedule row, starting here, I think we're going to use 16, right? D16. We're going to get that last. If it's less than 10, there's nothing there. So we can check for that. So the last schedule row. The last schedule D16. Now we're going to set that item description. I want to add one additional row, right? I want a loop row, meaning I want to put a space between whatever's there to have that item description have additional space. And why is that impossible? I just want to put additional space so there's some nice spacing there. So we're going to add a brand new row, or a carriage return, VBCRLF. That's going to add, this is what we call add new line. So we're adding a new line. So now I want to add something in here just to make sure that if there's no data, I want to make sure if the last pay schedule is less than 10, that means there's no data. So we're going to add that in there right here. So if last schedule row is less than 10, then go to, let's just say here, right here, we'll skip all of that. We don't need that here. We'll skip it all the way down here to right here. So we don't need any of that. Go to no pay schedule. So, and then put the colons there. We're going to copy that there without the colons. And then we're just going to put that right in front of the go to. So there, that way we have it. If there's no, we can skip all that. So the item description, we're going to add that new line. Now what we're going to do is we're going to loop for the schedule row equals 9 to the last schedule row. I need to loop through all of these. We're going to add them to the item description. So simply the item description is equal to whatever the item description is. And that means we have the words, please see the following payment schedule. This would be the current item description. So we need to add it to that. So it would be added to a brand new line. So we're adding that, and we're also adding whatever's located in D in the schedule row. And if we look, we see D is located, that milestone. So I want to add that. I want to add some spacing, and then I want to add the amount. So the first thing what we want to do is we add D. Then what we want to do is we want to space it out, but how much space? Well, it depends, because look, milestone, right, is a shorter name than gather scope. So I want everything to be exactly in order. So it's got to be based on the number of characters of milestone, right? So we're going to subtract the number of characters. Let's say if we take 30 characters minus the length of whatever this is, that will give us the exact spacing. And we do just that here. So I'm going to take 25 characters, basically, or base 25, minus, because we're going to run a space. I need to know how many spaces to add. This command, space, will add a certain number of spaces. Space, and then how many. But how many do we add? Well, I'm going to add 25 minus the length of whatever the milestone is. Length of this characters means the number of characters in that. So we're making that subtraction. So this way, if this one is 10 characters and another is 5 characters, we're also going to have the exact same spacing so that the next column lines up properly. This will ensure that the next column lines up properly. So once we've done that, I also want to add in that particular, so once we've added the number of spaces, I want to add in the amount. Now that amount is coming directly from here, column E. But I also want to, again, I just don't want to add that in. I want to add it in, and I want to format it based on whatever the format of column E is. So to do that, we're going to run format, right? We're adding in the value. Here's the value. And then we're formatting that value based on the number format of that cell. Then we're adding additional spaces. We're going to add additional spaces to that, 20 additional spaces. And we're going to add the last one. I want to know the percentage, right? What is that percentage? That's located in column F. And again, we're going to format it based on that. So we're doing the format again. We're adding the percentage based on column F, and then we're adding the number format, that percentage format, also based on that. And then we're going to add a brand new line. So this will ensure that there's a new line. So as we loop for that, every single item gets a brand new line, and it all gets lined up because soon we're going to add that, as we mentioned there, we add that particular specific font based on that. So we get a nice, everything's nice and lined up. Great, I'm glad I got to show that part to you. Let's continue on with the macro. Now, so that's all if we add the payment schedule, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to say the item number equals the item row minus 12, right? I want to know what the item number is. Again, this is item 1. This is item 2, this is item 3. So I want to track that item number. So we know that if the item row is 13, we know that the item number is 1. So if the item number is 1, again, we're going to repeat this. This time we're just simply going to repeat. Then the top position, just like we did before, equals L based on row 12, setting that top position. Otherwise, if it's a subsequent shape, meaning shapes 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, we're simply going to base it on the shape before, the top position of the shape before, plus the height of the shape before, plus 10, setting that top position. Okay, so now we've finished all the description based on that. Now we're ready to continue adding those shapes. Okay, we're going to set that left position is always going to be based on column L, and plus 3. So it's going to move it a little bit off. We're going to set the proposal. Now what we want to do is we're going to create, now remember we've deleted every single shape here. So we know we're ensuring that we are actually going to duplicate the sample shape just like we did before, giving it a very specific name, and then we're going to work with it. But however, the only thing to do is to change the font. Remember, if we comment this out, I'll show you once again. If I comment this out, we're going to get this really weird font that it's not lined up. I mean, the font looks good. It's the same font as everything else, but it's not lined up. I want to line it up, and I'm going to use a monospace font to do just that, and we're going to call it Lucida Console. There's a few other monospace fonts, probably a lot, but I'm familiar with that one. So to do that, only though if it contains pay schedule. Now I did not remove that variable yet. I need to keep that variable until I confirm it contains it. Once I know that we've changed the font, then I can remove the pay schedule. Certainly, right? I don't want that variable in here anymore, right? So let's go ahead and double click this. Just double clicking, that's going to automatically refresh it back to the font that we have, right? So now once we've confirmed that it does contain the pay schedule, we can then remove that variable using replace item description, removing the pay schedule, replacing what? And replacing it with nothing. This will remove, this line of code will remove that pay schedule variable. Remember, all this is only if it contains pay schedule, looking for that in string to see if it contains it. So we can simply, for only this type of particular item, are we going to change the font? Now, theoretically, you could change the font, all the font to the same. You might want to do that, change all the font. You could do that as well, so that it would be uniform. So that's fine. Else, right? Otherwise, we're taking the text frame and we're just adding the item description. So again, we're taking this particular shape and we're adding the item description to that shape. We've already updated the variables on it. So now all we need to do is add that text, that item description that's already been updated, and adding it to that text shape. We're going to set the width of it, right? We're going to do -3. And so we want to do subtract, setting the width basically to column L, but subtracting a little bit less than the outer. We're going to set that text frame again, just like we did before, auto sizing it. And then we're setting the height, updating the height, updating the left position and the top position based on the variables we have. And we're simply looping through all the items and doing just that. Okay, great. So that's how we get things updated, and that's the macro that's been assigned to that, whether we're including the variables or excluding the variables. Either way, it's going to show up. Great. So we understand how we're getting the items there. So that's really good. Let's go back into the property items and just a few more macros that I wanted to show you in this one, right? We've already covered add or update item. I believe this can be optimized. I can remove some of this code, which I'll be doing on Patreon. Another thing what I'd like to do is when I select an item, I would like that item to show up here, right? It's nice. Let's say I want to make an update to this. lowest price and I want to remove the possible that we've added, I might want to do that. So it's very nice if I can do that and I just click add or update. And it's nice that we can update it. So when I select on one of those items, I want that item to display here, and I also want to know the selected row. Now to do that, all we had to do is create a small macro called item select. It is that macro that has been assigned to the sample. So if we were to select that, it'd create a bug because there's nothing associated with that, but that's fine because that's only the sample that we're focused on, right? So this sample, we've already assigned a macro to that, and that's that item select here. So what I want to do is this. I want to extract the number. If I know this is item 1, right? What I want to do is I want to know what row. I know if I remove the word item, we're going to get 1. So if I know it's 1, I know it's row 13 here. I know it's the about us. So all we need to do is first extract the number. We can extract the number simply by removing the word item from the shape name. So to do that, we're going to set that item number. All we need to do is take on the shape that the user clicked. The name of the shape is called application color. We're going to remove the word item from it using the replace command. Okay, so replacing, what are we replacing? We're replacing item and we're replacing it with nothing. What that's going to do is leave us with just the number. If I know the number, then I also know the row because the row is simply the item number plus 12. This is going to get us the row number, the item row number. Okay, so now once we know the item row number, I also want to know what is the proposal item row. I want to know what row it's associated in here because I want to extract that description, whatever's been saved here, and I want this one. Now here's what I don't want. I don't want this particular text of this box in here. Why is that? Because I want I want that variable to show up. That's what I want. I don't want this, okay? So to do that, I need to extract whatever's in here in the item database. So I need to know what row has been associated with that because I want to extract whatever's located in column C. So all I need is the row. I know it's column C, so all I need is the row. Now we know that that database row has been saved here in column B. So if I know it's on row 13, all I need to do is look for B and row 13, and I know the database row. So if I know the database row, I'm going to pull it out, extract it directly from whatever's in C here and place it directly inside J3. And that's exactly what we do inside the code. So the proposal item row is located in B and the item row. That is the C. I put property here. That's why I'm getting confused. Proposal item row. Maybe I should do a property manager next. Another one. Proposal item database row. So that's it right here. So we've got the row. And again, J3 is simply equal to whatever's located in proposal items C and the proposal item row. That's going to set the description. And then what I want to do is I also want to set that selected row, right? When I select something, I want the selected row to change. Notice how it's changing. That conditional formatting, of course, it's based on B9. So I want to take that row, I want to place it directly inside B9, and that's going to trigger the conditional formatting. So B9 is simply going to equal the item row. That's all we need to do to select it. Okay, great. Now what about if I want to create a new item? If I want to create a brand new item like this, I want to have an item name here. So we're just going to use an input box very, very simply to add an item name. So if I want to do test 1, it's going to do just that, create that brand new item. It's going to clear it out. It's going to put the item name located in B1, and it's going to allow me to create a test item description, right? So I want to add that new item, and I want to be able to save that new item. So if I click, it's going to add that new item save. So new item is going to be the first macro. So new item is simply going to clear this out, and then it's going to clear out B1, and it's also going to create that input box. So new item, we're going to have item name as a string. Okay. First of all, I want to clear out B9. That's the selected row. I also want to clear out J3, so J44. That is the existing item. We're going to clear all of that out. I'm going to set the item name as a string variable equal to the input box. Enter the item name. And then the title is going to be item name. This will set an X and a Y position here. Okay, if the item name is empty, we're just going to exit the sub. Okay, we're going to set B1 equal to the item name. We're going to select J3. That's going to allow the user to start entering whatever enter they want. Great, so that's it for the new, but what about when we want to save it? If I want to save this and I click save, I want that automatically to be saved to the items database here into test 1. And I also want it also added to the first available row here. And I want it also added to the proposal. That way everything, when we save it, 1, it gets put here, 2, it gets put into the proposal item, and 3 gets added to the proposal. So I want all those things to happen. So that's going to be on item save or update. That is the macro that's been tied to this button up here. First of all, I'm going to dimension the item name as a string. We're focused on the proposal. If J3 is empty, right, we certainly need to enter a description for that. So please enter an item description, and then we need to exit the sub out of that. Exit sub. Okay, so nothing else we can do if we don't have a description. Okay, so we're going to set that item name based on whatever's in B1. We've already set that. And then what we want to do is if B8 is empty and item name is empty, on new or missing item name, right? I want to make sure that we have that, right? If we take a look inside B8, we see that we have an item database row. I want to know, is it an existing, just to make sure that we don't have any existing name. I want to make sure it is a new item, right? So if B8 equals empty and the item name does not equal empty, making sure that we do have a proper item and it has not been saved before, new item or missing name, right? Then what we're going to be doing is we're going to set the item name to the input just to make sure, let the user know that, hey, we need to enter the item name again, just to make sure. If the item name is empty, we're going to exit the sub, giving them the other opportunity just to make sure that we have an item name, okay? Okay, so now what we want to do is B8 is empty. We know it's a brand new item, just to be sure, to make sure, new item. And why is that important? Because if they decide that they're going to save or update it, right, and there is an existing item, right, we know that B8 is an existing item because there's a database row that's associated with this. So that means if I want to put in possible, right, and I want to save this update, if I decide to save this item, that will be saved in the future. So this is an existing item, this is a new item, right? I need to differentiate between those two changes, right? B8 is going to be able to do that for us. B8, if there's no database row associated with that, we know it is a new item. Okay, if it's a new item, we need to get the item row. That's going to be the first available row based on the item sheet. So we're going to get that and we're going to put it inside a variable. You're going to use and XLF plus row. That's the first available row. First available row. Once we have that, I want to set the item name. I'm going to put that in column A. A of that is going to take on that item name. B is going to take on whatever's located in J3. That's the description. Okay. I also want to know the selected row. What is the first available row, right? It's a new item, right? Since it's a new item, I want to put it down here, right? Because it's only for new items. I want to put it in the first available row. Using column H, the first available row, we can use range H999 and XLF plus 1. That is the, let's put first available row. Okay, that's probably better. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to take that item name, I'm going to put it directly inside that selected row. And I also want to update B9, right? B9 is that target row that we have. I want to update it. That's why it's automatically set. Test 1 is automatically set there. This is all only for new items. If it's an existing item, what I want to do is I want to set that item row, that database row based on B8. Okay, and I also want to update the description. I want to update whatever that description is located in B in the item row, whatever's in J3, we're going to update that description. That's how we can update that description, just like we did us. So that as we did here inside the, let's go back into the items here, as we saw that, and we saw the lowest price. Remember, we added that possible one. So in this case, we updated the existing item. In this case, we created a brand new item. Okay, great. So that's how we do either one. And then we just let a little bit message box saying item saved. That's it. Very easy. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to clear an item, right? What if I decide I remove this? I don't want this item as part of, I want to clear it. So I've created a little function here that we say, are you sure you want to clear it out? Yes. What that's going to do is going to clear it out from this proposal. It's also going to clear it out from here at the top of this. Now, it's relatively simple, except when we get into something like a middle one, not only do we have to, if we want to remove this one, I need to move everything else up. So if I clear this one out, right, I need to move everything else up in the scope above that, and I need to set it up. So it's a little bit more tricky because they've been also saved inside the database. So we need to update the database. So that way, when we reload it, it doesn't include that older item, okay, because everything's been saved. Okay, so here's how we're going to do that. The first thing what we want to do is focus on that sheet. I want to know we have to have a selected row. B is that row, right? So I want to make sure that B9 contains, if it's for blank for any reason, we cannot move on. There's no row to clear. But before we get to that, when I make a selection of that row, I want to make sure that this little icon shows up. This is called the clear item button. And the macro that's assigned to this button is called item clear. So how do we get this to show up? Well, that's going to be on selection change. When I make a selection change, I want it to show up. If I make any other selection change, I want it to disappear. Okay, so how do we get this clear item button to show up and not? Well, that's going to be on the selection change of our proposal sheet here. We're going to focus on selection change, worksheet selection change, okay? First thing what I want to do is I want to make sure that if that clear item button is visible, we're going to hide it. That means no matter what cell I select, it's going to be hidden. Now, I only want it to appear if the user makes a selection on H13 through H99 and H in the target row doesn't equal empty, meaning if they make a selection on something empty, I don't want it to appear. I only want it to appear when there's a value in column H. Okay, and the selected row. Okay, assuming that there is, then we can move on. I want to first take that target row and put it directly in B9. That's going to trigger the conditional formatting. Next up, I want to set that proposal item row. That proposal item row is located in B and whatever the row is. Okay, so B, right, and whatever the row is, it is going to take on that, let's call this proposal item database row. Okay, so we know the row. If it's 0, we're going to exit the cell, so it should never be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take whatever's located inside J. So now I know, and now remember, keep this in mind. I don't want to load whatever's located in our item database, right? Because we may have made changes, right? I only want to load what has already been saved for that proposal in this description here, the changes that we made for this specific proposal. And that's going to come from column C and the item proposal row. So column C of that sheet. So if we take a look inside here, it's going to be located here. J3 is going to take on whatever's in the proposal items, C and the proposal item row. That set item description, that's the one that's been saved for that specific proposal. And that's going to do that. Okay, now also what I want to do is I want to display that button, right? Now that we've selected something, we've displayed whatever's been saved for that, I want to display this little icon, and that's the one we're going to focus on now. So with that clear button, we're going to set that left position. It's going to be based on H and the target row, and we're going to subtract 15. So we're starting in H, but I'm going to subtract 15, which is going to move it over to the left a little bit. I'm going to change that to 14 because I don't want it all the way over there. So also want the top position based on H and the target row, the top position of that target row. And I also want to make sure it is visible. So that's all we need to do to make sure it's visible. Okay, of course, there's already been a macro that's been assigned to it, and that is the macro that we're going to be going over now, item clear. So when we clear that item, we need to make sure that we clear the database and clear it within the proposal here. So to do that, what we want to do is we want to make sure that, of course, we give the user that maybe they don't want to clear it, or maybe they click the button by mistake. So are you sure you want to clear the select item? If their answer is no, then we're simply going to exit the sub out. The second thing we want to do is simply hide that button. We don't need that button anymore, so we're going to hide the button with this command. Next up, I want to set into the variable the selected row. That selected row, or target row, selected is going to be located in B9. So B9 is going to take that on. And now once we have that, what I want to do is I also want to set the item number. Remember, the item number here, right, if we're on this one, the row is 13, our item number is 1 that's associated. Subtracting 12 will put that. Get that. So the item number is simply the selected row minus 12, and that is the item number. Okay, so once we have that item number, I want to determine the last item row. Why is that important? Because if I decide that I'm going to remove the about us, I need to shift everything else up. So I need to know the last row. In this case, it's 17. So getting the last item row based on column H is going to get us our last row. I also need to know the last item row. We know that if the last item, we need to know the last item shape. The last item shape is item 5. But we can determine that because we know that if the last item row is 17, which we just calculated, we're subtracting 12. That is going to get us our last item. That's important because we need to shift everything up. So I need to loop through all the shapes and bring everything up. If I decide to remove the about us, everything else must move up. So what we're going to do is the last item number is simply the last item row minus 12. That's going to be our last item number. Okay, so now that we have that, I also want to know what is the proposal item row. I want to know what item row we're going to be removing. And we know that item row because it's going to be located in column B. So for this one, we'd be removing row 18. So if we look at the proposal items, we know we're going to want to remove row 18. However, if we remove, let's say, row 7, this one, we need to move everything up. In other words, this one needs to become 16, this needs to become 17, right? Because it is no longer, this particular one is no longer on row 16. We need to move this one, scope work up, row up 1. So this needs to become 16. This will automatically become 17 because it will be one row up because we're using it based on the formula. So the idea is that when we remove everything but the last one, if we decide we're going to remove scope of work, this is going to become row 5, this is going to become row 6, this is going to become row 7. So we need to make those updates inside the code. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we actually have a property item row. It's located in column B. We want to make sure that it's not 0. If it is, we're going to skip the delivery. I also want to know this important thing. Let's assume that this is the last one we're removing. If we're removing the last one, all we need to do is just clear this from the database, row 18 clear, delete it from the database, and also remove the last shape. However, if it is the previous one, we need to update everything else beyond that. And we also then need to remove the shape and move everything else up. So that is what we're going to be doing inside the code. So what we want to know is it the last item row? Is the selected row the last item? Right? Is it that last item? If it is, then what are we going to do? We're going to clear the database, right? We've already got it in a variable, so we don't need it. We're going to clear it out from B. And we are also going to go to skip row change, meaning that we need to skip a few. We don't need to move everything up, so we can skip some things. So, however, if it is not the last item row, if it is here, 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 or here, then we need to update the remaining items, right? Very important, right? Because if row 7 is gone, this becomes row 17 inside the database. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to skip it. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a loop from the item row, right? So the item row is going to be equal to, so let's say we remove scope of work. I'm going to run a loop from the next row, from this row 15, all the way to the last one, 17. We're going to be making the updates on these items, updating this to 5, this to 6, and this to 17, and updating it inside the database. Not only that, though, but let's say if I remove this scope of work, right? Terms and conditions is going to move up. Now it's on row 15. It's going to move to 14. The next one's going to move to 15, and the next one's going to be 16, and 17 is going to be empty, right? So we need to also update the individual items. That would be the proposal rows inside here. So just like it is here. So this would become, if I remove 14, this would become 14, this would become 15, and this one would become 16. See, those are all for proposal number 1. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing inside the code. So the first thing is we're going to run a loop for the one above the selected row, the one below it, I should say, to the last item row. And I want to know if the database, right, this database number 5, is it less than 6? Is it less than the next one over? If it's less, then I need to reduce the quantity of this by 1. So we're going to check if that database row is less than the next one, B in the item row value. B, this is the loop we're running, the item, right? The item row is going to go from 15, 16, and 17, assuming we're deleting 14. So what we're going to ask is 5 less than 6? If it is, then take 6 and reduce it 1. So that's what we're going to do inside the code here. So if it's less than, right, the database less than there, what we're going to do is we're going to take D and the property item. So I'm going to look for that database row. It's in B right here, B in the item row. So that means I'm going to look for this 6, right, this 6. And I'm going to look in the 6th row, and I'm going to go into the property items, and I know it's row 6. And then I'm going to look for D, right, and I'm going to take this number, 15, and I'm going to reduce it by 1. So that's what we're going to do right here. We're going to reduce it, the item row, by 1. We're updating the row in column D, reducing it by 1. We also then need to reduce the database row, right? Also inside this here, we also need to reduce this 6 by 1 too. So B and here, the column selected row, that row is going to be reduced by 1. So that's what we're going to do in this next line of code. B and the item row equals whatever the value it currently is minus 1. We're subtracting the database minus 1. So that's all we're going to do. We're just going to loop through those and reduce each one by 1, assuming that it is less than the one we're on now. If it is, then we're going to go ahead and do that, right? We want to make sure that basically means that the database row that we're currently on is greater than the property item row. I could switch these around and mark it as greater just as easily. Okay. All right. So that's how we're going to update the database, right? And then the only other thing last thing to do is actually delete the item row, right? We don't want to delete the actual row until we've made all the updates necessary. Okay. So we need to make the updates, then we delete the item row. Okay. All right. So now we're done with the database change. Now what we want to do is we need to update the shapes accordingly, right? If we were to remove this middle shape here, right? The scope of work, the item number 2, we need to update 3, 4, and 5 all the way update, making 3 number 2, 4 number 3, and 5 number 4, and moving them up. So that's what we're going to do just on this. First thing what we want to do is we want to delete the current shape, right? If we are going to delete scope of work, this would be item number 2. So we're going to delete item number 2, as long as it exists, which it should. So item and the item number 2, we're deleting the associated shape. Next up, what I want to do is I want to clear the item name, right? I want to clear whatever's in H, that selected row, clearing that out. We're going to move the rest up, okay? All right, so now I also want to clear the selected row in B9, and I want to select J3. So I want to just select something else. Now I'm going to run a loop. I just want to make sure if the item number, again, if we're on the last item, if the item number is the last item, we don't need to move up any shapes. So we don't need to clear anything out, right? We're done, right? We don't need to move anything up. We don't need to move any shapes up. So here, if the item number equals the last item, then exits up. We're done, right? We're done with everything. There's nothing else we need to do if we're on the last one. However, if we're not on the last one, we need to do 2 things. We need to move the items up here, and we need to move the shapes up 1. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in the next lines of code. First of all, we're going to set B10 to true. And the reason we're setting B10 to true is because we're actually making changes to here. And so when we do that, we also want to set B10 to true, noticing that we're going to be actually making item changes and then bringing it back to false once we're done. Okay, so we're going to set that to true, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring everything up, bring all those. So H and the selected row equals H and the last item row plus 1. What does that mean? Okay, let's say we remove this 1. So H and the selected row all the way right down to the last one, basically we're saying this, like copy, right, equals whatever is this, right? So we're just taking the values of this is going to be equal to the values of this. So that's all we're doing, just bringing everything up. The last thing we need to do is clear out that last row, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So the first line of code is simply bringing up those values. The last one is simply clearing it out, okay? We also want to clear out the last item of B, right? We want to make sure that the last item row of B, once we move everything up, we also need to clear the last one here. We've already changed, we've already updated everything, but we also need to clear the last item here. Once we've done all that, we can set B10 back to false. We've made the changes in H, so we can set them back to false. And now what we want to do is rename and reposition the shapes. So we've taken care of all the items here. Now we just have to update the shapes accordingly. So again, we've already deleted the shapes. All we need to do is redo the shapes below. So the shape number, again, we're going to go through the item number plus 1, right? If our item number is 2, we've just deleted 2. Our item number plus 1 is item 3. So we're going to loop from 3 to 4 to 5. 5 is the last one. So this would be from 3, item number, which is 2, the one we deleted, to the last item, which is 5. Remember, that last item number we've already identified here is the last item row minus 12, right? So if our last item row is 17 minus 12, that's going to be 5. So 5 is our last one, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through. We're looping through all the shapes, right? If the shape number is less than 2, less than or equal to 2, right, I want to make sure that in the top position, right, if that is, we've deleted that, just setting the top position for the first shape. Let's say we deleted 1, right, and the shape number is 2. We need to make sure that the top position is basically row 12, right? For every other shape, just as we've done before, the top position is simply the shape number minus 2, in this case 2 below, plus the shape number minus 2 plus height. So basically we're moving it 2 shapes up because we've deleted one, right? We've deleted one, so we're setting the top position to 2 above that. And then also what we're doing is we're renaming the shape, right? That we need to rename because shape number 5 becomes 4 and so on and so forth. So item in the shape name equals the item in the shape number I should say, minus 1. So we're renaming the shape to 1 before that, right? If we delete shape 2, we need to rename item 3 to 2. We need to rename item 4 to item 3, and so on and so forth. Okay. All right. So that's it. And then all we want to do is just simply reset the top position, right? So the item and the shape number top. So we're setting that top position is equal to the top. So we're just resetting that shape to the new top position. So that's how you move everything up. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like when we do it. Okay, so if I remove this one, let's just take a quick look here just so we can see it. We know that we've got the scope of work, right? We've got it down here. We're going to be removing this scope of work here. So I want to remove this one here. And also keep in mind inside our proposal items here. So we've got our scope of work. It's right here, 14 to 5. We've got 2 more items here, rows 15 and 16. And we got 1 more down here, 17, right? So we're going to be removing this one here. So let's take a look inside the proposal, selecting here. Oh, yes, we want to delete it. Okay, what that's going to do is bring everything up. Okay, it brought everything up. Now we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 items here. Okay, inside our proposal items, we have 1, 2, 3 items, right? Rows 13, 14, and 15, which is correct. And then the last one is row 16, right? So everything got updated. Let's take a look back inside here. Our database rows have now updated to 4, 5, 6, and 17. Everything is set properly. Great, so that was clear. I know it can get a little bit confusing because we've got to make a lot of updates, but that is how we clear the updates. Okay, we've gone over all the proposal items. We have just a few left on the proposal macros. Let's go up to the top and focus on the save and update. This is this macro that runs every time we click the save and update. It's going to either save or update that proposal. We're going to go if B2 equals empty. We need to make sure that we have an actual customer, right? We want to make sure that we do. That customer is going to be located row in B2. If that is empty, we need to make sure that we have. I want to determine the last item row. We're going to need to loop through all the items. If there's no items at all, I want to let the user know to please add an item to the proposal to make sure. So we're going to check if that last item is less than 13. Let the user know to please make sure to add some items. We also want to know if it's determine a new proposal or not. Okay, actually I left that out. The last item, that's okay. I let it. We can now save a proposal without items. That's okay, no problem. But it does, a customer is required. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to determine if it is a new or an existing proposal. How do we know that? If it's been assigned a row or not. B4 is going to tell us if B4 is blank. We know it is a new proposal. Of course, if it is filled with a row, we know it is an existing. So we can use B4 to tell us if B4 is empty. We know it is a new proposal. If it's a new proposal, we're going to assign a brand new row for that, the first available row on the proposal list. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to assign it a brand new ID. We want to make sure that B3 takes on whatever is that next property ID from B6. So B3 is going to take on the value of B6. Okay, I also want to set that brand new proposal ID, and I want to put it directly in A and the proposal row, right? That's got to go in the first column right here. All right, continuing on. Now that we have that ID located for that proposal directly in column A, I want to simply determine whether if it is an existing, all we need to do, of course, is then change it, determine the proposal row from B4, right? B4 is going to take out if it's already an existing one. Continuing on in our code. So now that we know for existing, we're just going to simply extract it from B4. Everything else is going to be the same, whether it's a new proposal or an existing. In fact, we can use a really cool style of data mapping. We don't even have to map the data. Because our fields here are all in order, date, status, proposal name, customer, and total amount, all 5 of those fields are in exact same order as we have here, date, status, proposal name, customer. We know we're starting at column 2 here. We know here in date, it was row 2, so it's going to be very, very simple for us to map that data. All we need to do is simply run a loop for the proposal column equals 2 to 6. And the proposal list, the proposal row, we've already defined that either here or here if it's a new one. The proposal column is going to be dynamic from 2 to 6. So here's the cells that we're updating on the proposal list, and it's going to come directly from E and the proposal column. Remember, this can be a row or a column, right? It's going to go from 2 to 6, 2 to 6, right? Our rows are the same thing, row 2 to row 6, column 2 to column 6. So it's very, very simple. We can use that. So that's data mapping in its finest. Very, very simple. We can simply add that in, adding the date, status, name, customer, and the total here. Great. But now we also have other things that are attached to this proposal. We have our payment statuses. Those need to be saved. And we have our items. Those also need to be saved. But actually, we've already saved them. So we really don't need to add our items because those get saved as soon as we add them. They're automatically saved. So it's really our payment items that we need to be sure of just to make sure. Okay, so the first thing is we want to determine the last row of the payment schedule row. What is that last row? And that's going to be based on D16. So the last possible row here is 15. So we're going to use that, right? Our last row in this case is 13. So we're going to run a loop from 10 to 13. We're going to save all this information. I want to know if it's been saved before. If it has, there'll be a row right here, and then I know what row to save it. If it has not, we will save it to a new row. And therefore, if I add another thing, like just say warranty, and I want a new warranty, $50, right? And I decide to make this 1050, right? So now we can add it in. So now, right, we're going to add this up. When I save this, I want this added to a brand new row. So as we move forward, so if the last pay schedule is less than 10, that means we have no pay items. We could skip all that and go all the way down here. Assuming that we do have items, I then want to run a loop for the pay schedule row equals 10, which is the first possible row, all the way to the last possible row. In this case, it would be 14, right? And I want to determine, has it been saved before? If C and the schedule row equal empty, then it is a new schedule, new payment item called payment item, okay? Otherwise, it is an existing here. Otherwise, we go down and we just extract the database row, existing, okay? If it is a new one, all we're going to do is get that first available row. We've done this before. We're going to put that proposal ID, we're going to put that, it's going to come from B3, it's going to go into column A, just as we always do. Certainly, we need inside here the first column to have that proposal ID. Then I want the milestone, then the amount, then I want to know the row that's associated on the proposal, and then the database row based from a formula. All right, so continuing on. So A is going to take on that proposal ID. Also for new items, D is going to take on that pay schedule row. I want to know the row that's associated with that. I also want to, in E, I want to put that formula. That's going to be our database row in E. And then the database row that we've just created, I want to put that in column C, which is going to be our pay schedule database row. So that's going to set that database row. So that's only for new items. For existing items, all we need to do again is extract the database row directly from column C. The other two items are for each both new and existing pay items, where we update in column B, we're going to update the milestone, and in column E, we're going to update the amount. That is all we have to do. Again, like I said, we aren't saving items in here because those are saved as soon as we add them. Those get saved to the database. Notice the database row here, it's already added here, so no need to do that. All right, so all we need to do is do the payment schedule, okay? And then all we need to do is run that fade out message. That's the last thing, and that fade out message is actually down here. I should bring that up, but it's here, right here. That fade out message, simply going to take a shape and fade it out on a timer. Relatively simple. We've been over that. It's kind of boring. All right, so then when I save this update, right, notice the brand new row has been assigned to here. If we look in the pay schedule database, we see row 13, and it's been assigned to 14, warranty $50, and it's going to be on here. So that automatically got assigned. It automatically got, and that fade out message came. It was rather quick. Okay, great. So that is how we save and update, right? We already went to the show and hide details. We covered that already. Remember, that was how we show and hide. That's the macro that when we would display here, it's going to show and hide our variables here, our values. Okay, so next up on our list is our proposal new, a relatively simple macro, right? First thing we want to do is when we click new, of course, new proposal, which is this button right here, we want to clear out all the shapes that are associated with that, right? All the shapes, there's still shapes here, but they're just empty, right? They have no data until we put in a proposal name. Let's see, Frank website, right? And then we put in a customer in, then those items start to get added in. So those fields are automatically added in based on that. Okay, so when we click new, we need some things that we need to clear out, some information, right? Some cells that get cleared out. First thing we do, just like we did before, is we're going to loop through all the shapes inside the sheet. Any shapes that contain the word item or string item is going to be removed. We're going to set B7 to true. That's going to set the proposal load to true. We're going to clear out a bunch of fields, right? Clearing the contents out. Then we're going to set the next proposal ID. B3 is going to equal B6. Okay. Then what we're going to be doing is we're going to set the current date to E2. I'm going to set that current date here. And I also want to set the status, right? That default status. So what is that default status? We went over that early on. I'm going to look for this check mark, right? I'm going to look for it, and wherever it's located, I want to put whatever value is found in E and that column, and I'll place it right here inside E3. So that's what we're going to do next. All right, but we're going to wrap it in on arrow resume next, because if it's not found, what I'm going to do is I'm going to determine that status row. I need to know what is the default row for that status. You see it's on row 8 here, but I'm going to look at it I'm going to take a look inside from range F6 all the way through F12. I'm going to look for that check mark, right? So admin, so the status row is simply equal to admin F6 to F12. What am I going to find? I'm looking for character 252. Character 252 is that checkbox. How do we know that? Well, when we click insert and we click symbol and we look for the checkbox here, we see it's wingdings 252. That's how we know the character number. So inside VBA, we know it's character 252. Okay, great. So now that we have that, we know that we're looking for it. We're going to use the find command to look for it, right? And then we're going to look in Excel values, and I want to extract the row. If it's not found, it will create an error. So therefore, I've wrapped it in on arrow resume next and on arrow go to 0. Assuming it's not 0, then all we need to do is just take the value in E3 and whatever is in E, which is our status, E and the row, and place that directly inside E3. That's going to get us our default status, and that's all we have to do for new. Okay, great. So that covers new, but what about load? Well, what happens when we load? When we load it, we enter a particular proposal number in F1. So what happens? Let's go back to the beginning. Under the proposal, we're making a change event. This we don't need. And we're making a change event, and that's going to be up here. So worksheet change event. And we're focused on a specific cell, and that cell is F1 right here. So it's going to be on enter proposal number change. When we make a change to F1, and we want to make sure that F1 is not blank, we want to do a few things. Remember, I said when we enter something, we need to check for the correct row. It's going to be based on this value here, right? Because this is based on F1. When we enter, we're looking for a match. If there's not an error, there's a whole number in here, we know it's a correct row. All we need to do is take the proposal number from here and place it directly inside B3. So that's what we're going to do here. If B5 equals empty, then we know we have an incorrect number, right? If I put an incorrect proposal number here, please enter the correct proposal ID. Why is that? Because we see, if we look here, we see B5 is empty. We know it's incorrect because B5 is empty, right? So we need to enter a proper one. To do that, we just give the user the message box, please enter a correct proposal ID. We're going to select F1. We could probably clear contents out, right, of that as well. We could do something like this, range F1 dot clear content. So that'll clear it out. If it's incorrect, there's no reason to keep it, okay? Then F1 select. Okay, and exit the sub out, letting the user put in another proposal ID. Assuming that it is correct, what we're going to do is we're going to send, again, like I said, B3 is going to take on that correct proposal ID, which is located in F1. We can then clear out F1, and we can run the macro that we're going to go over right now called proposal load. Proposal load is this one right here inside our proposal macros. And again, just like we've done before, we need to remove all of the shapes in the sheet, right? We don't want to create any new shapes. We want to clear all the ones out. And I want to make sure that B4 does contain a row. If it doesn't, we need to let the user know just in case to make sure they've entered a correct proposal number. Okay, we're going to set that proposal row to whatever's in B4. And then also I want to set the proposal load to true while we make all those changes. And then of course, it's going to go back to false when we finish it down here, right? It's going to go back to false. But while we're making those changes, we're going to clear out all the contents except for B3. That's the proposal ID. We need to keep that. Everything else gets cleared out. Again, then we can use simply the reverse data mapping. In this case, we're extracting information from the proposal row, which we know, from the dynamic columns, from columns 2 to 6. We're going to load it directly in E in the proposal column. Again, this is simply the reverse of what we were doing saving, bringing it from the database into our form inside the sheet, loading all that information in. We also want to load the payment schedule, right? So what I want to do is I want to extract the payments. I want to know all the payments, but I only want to know the payment schedule associated for proposal ID located here in B3. So to do that, we're going to run an advanced filter based on our payment schedule database. So you see here the criteria. This particular criteria is based on B3. I'm going to determine the last row. I'm going to run an advanced filter. I only want to know those items that are associated with proposal, and I want those results to come directly in here. So that's what we're going to be doing inside this code, focusing directly on the pay schedule database, which is this sheet here. Determining the last row. If it's less than 4, we're going to exit the sub. That means there's no data, right? Assuming that we have data, we can move on and run that advanced filter from A3 all the way through E in the last row. Running that criteria is going to be J2 through J3, just as we said before. And we want the results to come from L2 through O. Those results are going to come. Once we do, we need to determine the last row of the results row using column L, which is that required field. So L, it's going to get us our last results row. We know that. If it's less than 3, then we have no items. We can skip and go directly to here, right? Nothing to bring over if there's no information, no pay items. Assuming that there are, what I would like to do is then run a loop. I want to know, I need to run a loop from the first all the way to the last. I want to get the row here. What row is that? 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. I want to get that row because I need to know what row to place it in, row 10 or 11. So we need to extract that row. That row is going to come directly from our column O. So that's the first thing we're going to do inside a variable. So running our loop, so that pay schedule row is located at O and the result row. This is the row that we're going to have to put it in. Then all we need to do is simply bring the items in. So I'm going to bring all this information, these 3 columns, L, M, and N. Those are going to go directly inside columns here, C, D, and E. This is a formula. It doesn't change, okay? So we're going to bring it out. So for each one, we're just going to simply bring in here. And that's why it's important that the order, the row, the milestone, and the amount are also the same inside our results must be the same order, so it's much easier within the code. So C through E simply equals L through N of the result row, bringing that in. So we're just going to loop through that and bring those all in. Lastly, what I want to do is I want to bring over the payment schedule, right? So this is going to bring it over. That's not needed. We're doing it row by row. Okay, that's sufficient. All we need to do is just that, more than sufficient enough. That brings it over here. So that was overkill. We don't need that extra line. We want to go row by row because I want to make sure that it's in the right proper row. So notice that they're here in the right row now. We have them. Great, because there's additional ones that we have to make sure that we reach all the items properly. So we actually have 5 items in this. Very, very important. So we're going to loop through all the last row. Hey, what about the proposal items? We need to add in the individual items, right? And again, the same thing as we did. We want to run through all the items here, right? An advanced filter based on the criteria here, B3, just like we did in the items, bringing them over inside the results, and then bringing those results. In this case, I want to bring this into column B. These are our rows. I want to bring the item names into column H, and then I want to loop through these, and these particular ones are going to go into the shapes. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we're going to determine the last row, the last results, making sure that it's less than 4. We're going to no items. We need to make sure that we have items. And this is, again, focused on the proposal items database. If last row is less than 4, we're going to go to no items, probably because we're well over 2 hours on this one, right? We need to make sure that we have items before we run our advanced filter. A3 through E, advanced filter, we're going to have the criteria G2 through G3. That is our proposal ID. Also the copy to range, K2 through N2. That's where we want our results to go. We're going to determine the last row based on column K. If it's less than 3, we have no items. We're going to skip all the way down here to no items. If we do have items, which we almost always should, what I want to do is I'd like to sort those because I want to make sure they're in the right order. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to run a sort, right? It's going to be based on N3. I want to sort them based on the row there so that they're all in the right order. And I want to make it ascending, so it's the lowest first. I like to have them in this order, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to set that range K3 through N, that full range in the last results row, and we're going to sort them based on ascending, right? Just like they are here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a result, right? I want the property row going to be equal to N property. Then I'm going to run the proposal row to item row through N in the result row. Get the proposal. I think we don't need this. I'm getting rid of this sort. It's nice, but it's not necessary. Okay, because why is it not necessary? Because whatever order they're in, I'm going to extract the row, and I'm not going to bring them over. I'm just going to bring them over individually. So now, if you're bringing over one block and bring it over, then you want them sorted. But if I do item by item. I've got the row here. We can get rid of the sort. That's not necessary. All right, because I'm going to go through row by row, which is a little bit more accurate. So what we're going to be doing here, what we're going to do is we're going to extract from column N. I'm going to extract that proposal item row. Once we know the row, we know exactly where to place it. B and the proposal item row is going to take on that database row in K. That means this particular row is going to go into row 13. This database row is going to go into row 13. Inside our proposal, if we look here, that database row is going to go into row 13, right? See it right here inside row 13. And then also what I want to do is I want to put H, this item name, inside H. So that's the second line of code. Inside H, we're going to put whatever is in L. And of course, L is our item name. Okay, so that's going to bring that over. All right, that's all we have to do there. Everything else, proposal, show or hide data is going to bring in, right? So once we've gone through that, that brings in all the information, right? We've brought in the database here, we've brought in the items, we've brought in the payment schedule, we've brought in the information. All we have to do is create this, and this is this particular proposal. These proposal shapes are automatically brought in with the macro we've already gone over, proposal, show, or hide detail, right? That's already been brought over. So that brought them back in order, and then it showed it whether it's the same macro that runs this. Remember, the same one that runs this. Okay, good. So we've covered that. That's all we have to do for load. Okay, next up, deleting. Deleting is one of the last ones, deleting and print, and then I'm going to let you go. Okay, so for deleting, what do we want to do? Well, we need to delete the database that's associated. We need to delete all the payment items, and we need to delete all the proposal items. So that's very important, okay? So to do that, we want to make sure to let the user know, are we going to delete this proposal or not, okay? So let's go ahead and create a new proposal here, and we'll just give it a test name, right? And then a test customer, and then we'll add payments onto that. Okay, test 1, and then we'll just do an amount, $50, and then test 2, okay? So that way we can see the items and we see how the delete is going to work. Okay, so now we will save it, right? Save and update, and we'll add some items to this here. This is how quickly we can create these proposals, which is really incredible. Although you probably don't want 2 signature lines. So let's go ahead and add this in. So the terms and conditions. Okay. And we see that everything's been saved. Okay, so we know in the proposal list, we've got a brand new one here, number 5. In our proposal items, we've got 3 items associated with that. And in our pay schedule database, we have 2 items that are associated with this note. So now we know that we're going to be deleting that. We can easily follow along. So continuing on with the macro, right? If B4 is empty, we know it hasn't been saved. We're going to go to not save, although it's almost always going to be saved, right? If it has not been saved, we can skip all of that and just go to proposal new. Fair enough. And basically, that's the macro that's tied to this button here, delete proposal. Okay, so basically what that means, if we go to a new proposal and we enter some information here, test, right, and then we decide to delete it at this point, right, at this point there hasn't been saved anywhere, we can delete it. All it's going to do is go to add new. It's just there's no databases to clear out. Okay, but assuming that we have, which is the proposal number 5, then we need to delete the associated database rows. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to determine what row it is on based on B4. That's our proposal. Let's do this proposal row. And assuming that we have the proposal row, we're going to delete the actual row from the proposal list. So this is going to delete the row. We also need to remove the items associated with that. So we're going to focus on running an advanced filter. Proposal item is going to be based on the last row. We're going to run that brand new just to make sure. We're going to run an advanced filter on these 5, and I want to extract just these 3 items and put them right here. So running the same advanced filter that we would if we were loading it up, exactly the same. If the last result's less 3, we have no items, so we can skip all this. If it's less than 4, we don't need to sort the items. It is very important to sort these items. In this case, I want to sort them from the database row. It's going to be K, so I want the highest first, 25, 24, and 23. That's very important because I want to make sure that the highest rows get deleted first. That is a very critical component, otherwise it'll create lots of issues. So to do that, I want to make sure that we're sorting based on column K, right? The proposal items column. And I want to make sure it's just descending, very, very important. And for our entire range, K3 through N, the last results row. Once it is sorted this part, right, it'll be sorted 25, 24, 23. Then we delete row 25 first, we delete row 24, and then we delete row 23. So in that order. Okay, so we're going to run that loop. For the result row equals 3 to the last result row. Okay. Then what we're going to do is determine in that proposal item, we're going to determine that row is located in K, so we know what row to delete. We're then going to delete it with this line. Okay. Once we do that, we're simply going to loop through everything until they've all been deleted. Okay, very important. We're going to do almost the exact same thing with the pay item schedule, right? We're going to run an advanced filter. We're going to then base it on this database row, run a sort descending so that the highest row is here and then the lowest row is here. So when we delete it, we're going to run the advanced filter just like we did before. If there's no items, we can skip. If there's a single item, we don't need to sort, so we can skip that as well. Our sort's going to be based on L3, and it's going to be descending again. We're going to run the results L3 through N. And then what we want to do is run a loop, just as we did before, for 3 to the last results row, extracting that scheduled database row from a row column L, and then deleting the entire row. That's it. And then, of course, we run the macro to create a new proposal. That is it. So if we were to go into the proposal and delete this proposal and say yes, it's going to automatically delete that proposal. Okay. And we take a look in the proposal list. Number 5 is no longer here. Proposal items, 5, the items are no longer here. Pay schedule, 5 is no longer here. So it's been clearly deleted. Very good. That's working quite nicely. And of course, the last macro that I have for you today is the print. Now, when we print this, we want to set the certain range, right? We need to know what range to print. Certainly, we know it's going to start in L1, but what's the last row, right? There's no data here in the rows itself. They're based on shapes. So what we need to do is to set that print range, we need to determine the last row. How do we do that? Well, to do that, what we can do is find the last shape and find what the property is for the bottom right cell row. What is the row for this shape? What row is associated with this shape? So we can, once we determine the last shape, we can determine the row. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. The last item row is based on column H, right? We know that the last item row in this case is 17, right? So if I know the last item row is 17, I need to know the last shape. Well, again, we subtract 12, and we know that our item shape is 5, right? So we're going to do that. If the last item is less than 13, we need to, of course, add at least one item before we print. So let the user know to at least add one item. I want to set that item number. What is the item number? It's the last item row minus 12. So if this is 17, our item number is 5. I'm going to set the item shape. Remember, I need to get this item shape. I need to get item 5, right? I need to make sure that there's a shape associated with that. So to do that, we're going to set the item shape to equal the item and the item number. That's going to set the last item shape. Set the last item shape. Okay, once I have that last item shape, I need to extract that row, that last property row. If item shape is nothing, we're going to exit the sub just to make sure we do. It should always be. So the property row is simply extracting the last row. It's the item shape, the bottom right cell of that shape, and I want to extract the row from it. This is going to get us the last row of the shape, right? So this particular one, if we take a look here, that's right around 33, right? So it's going to get us 33. We see that it's right around 33. Once we have that, we can then set our print area. Do this by the page setup. The print area is equal to, we know it starts on L1, we know it's a single column L, and we know it's the proposal row. So that proposal row is going to create our entire print area. Once we have set that print area, we can use the print out. And it is this macro that has been assigned. So once I print proposal, it'll print out to my default printer, which is Snagit, and it'll print this nice proposal right here. So we can see everything looks good on this beautiful proposal, and it's all been printed out very, very nicely to the default printer. Wow, what a cool training. I think we've been over so much. So I showed you how to create this really incredible proposal generator, creating unlimited proposals with different types, different styles, customizing them. All we also have to show you how to work with shapes and present them in a beautiful manner, change the fonts, and we show you how to do a really cool column where we had additional this payment schedule, right? We can create that, a really cool payment schedule on that. We don't need all these signature lines. I hope that you've liked this amazing training. I'll be adding additional Save as PDF email proposal. We'll be adding those features on our Patreon platform along with whatever you request. So make sure you get on our Patreon platform right away. I'll include the links down below. I also have more than 50 other trainings on Patreon, right? Additional trainings that you've never seen before. You'll get all that and a whole lot more as soon as you join. That's going to help us out a lot. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.